I used to think, and I still do in some ways, that missionary priests, there was just this sort of a drama and a kind of a romantic thing to the lives of a missionary that's certainly exciting and maybe arguably more interesting than the life of a parish priest, living in the suburbs. I mean, it's not the jungle. It's not in the wild where you're bringing Jesus, for the first time to people who've never heard him. And there's still some objective, cool elements of that a guy in the suburbs is probably never going to encounter. But I think that less now because of experiences I've had because the need to it seems to me that this is mission country now. I was a college chaplain on a real big secular university, and was asked one night to come in to the dorm. I guess once a month they have a speaker come in for all the residents, and they kind of have to go to it. It's a command performance thing. So 35 students in this lounge, and it was during Lent. So the RAs asked if I could come in and talk about what Lent is all about. So I did, and I went in, and I knew immediately just from the body language that these people didn't want to hear about Lent. They didn't want to even be there. They certainly didn't want to hear from me. I would say that probably half of them certainly weren't even Catholic. A percentage of them weren't even Christian. So it was just not an inviting situation. And they wanted me to talk about the ashes and no meat on Friday, and I kind of at the last minute said, nah, I'm not going to do that because I don't think that's going to go anywhere. So I talked about the cross. I said that, we do, when we get the ashes on Ash Wednesday, the beginning of Lent, we put this cross on our forehead. You walk around with something on your forehead, we must be trying to communicate that this is a big deal, that this matters. We wouldn't put it on our face and walk around for a day. And it is important. And I said that I talked about the reality of crosses in the lives of all people and sacrifice. And I guess what I said was, those who sacrifice win. The people who live lives where they embrace sacrifice, not for the sake of it, but when needed, or sacrifice for a greater good, they're the people who live happy lives and meaningful lives. And then I got even more specific, and the example I talked about chastity and the challenge of being a Christian, of being a Catholic. And then I took it beyond that, or prior to that, and I said the challenge is just being a moral, being a chaste person. Forget your faith. Anyway, as I started to talk about sex, people seemed to get a little more interested. And in the course of what I was saying, ultimately, what I was leading to was nobody in this room has a right at this point in their life to be acting out sexually. It's all a bunch of single people and a celibate priest in this room. And eventually one guy who kind of looked pretty skeptical the whole presentation raised his hand and says, "Are you saying that none of us, that it would be wrong for everybody in this room to be sleeping with their girl or boyfriend?" And I said, yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. And I explained a little bit more why it was ultimately selfish and lots of reasons. And they looked at me like I was out of my mind. Just half of them were kind of laughing, or not outwardly, but smirking. And then I just talked about how people feel when they make mistakes sexually, when they're with people that they don't even know, when they're with people that they don't even remotely love, and how after the fact it's awkward and something seems not right. There's like a funk going on inside of them. They can't quite name it, but they just know something. They kind of feel guilty. Maybe they feel a little used. Maybe they feel like they compromised something about themselves. Maybe their reputation was called into question. Something's not right. And I tell you, when I started to say that, people I just was looking at them like they were, the look on their face was, well, I know that feeling. I know that awkward feeling when I see this person 2 days later. I know this kind of weird floating guilt thing, or that seems to be. And I just said, I think that comes from God, because we all come from God. We weren't wired to act like animals who just mate, who don't consider relationship, who don't consider love, truth, commitment. It doesn't mean anything to animals. We're different. And I think that awkward feeling, that's actually God speaking to us. That's God saying, "Oh, you're better than this. That is not the way you were called to live." And it was an experience I'll remember, because talk about, like, I walked into this room looking like this, a college campus, a secular college campus. That's where secularism is bred, on college campuses. And I walked into a crowd that didn't even really want me to be there. And I started to talk about what we teach. I started to just talk about the teaching of the church. I talked about Christ. I talked about the cross. And it started to make sense, like in this almost pagan, certainly secular crowd. It was like, man, this is cutting through. And it was certainly nothing wasn't me. It was the truth of what we're about. Like, despite this, people making huge mistakes repeatedly, I was tapping into something. And it was just a reminder to me that, man, that's mission country. It's not a paddle in a canoe and going down some river in some jungle, but in some ways it's more mission, because these people are kind of educated, because they've got alternatives. They're not hungry. They're not looking for shelter. They got all that. They don't, in their mind, they don't need Jesus. They don't need the truth of the church. And the challenge of that, I think those people, they're oppressed. They're oppressed, not a whole lot unlike those Polish people who were oppressed in 1940 by the Nazis. And that young future pope was saying, no, this oppression this is not truth. And in his own way, before he was even a priest, he was preaching a gospel of resistance. And I think, in some way, maybe that's what was going on in this lounge, in this dorm. And I think, the priesthood, it seems to me, it's about lots of things. But I think today, that's what we're confronting. We're confronting a culture that either doesn't care or that's hostile. Neither of them are great options. But it's also really exciting. The prospect of that is incredibly exciting.